Hello and welcome to CapCity BTC, Sacramento's premier Bitcoin and cryptocurrency group serving Northern California. Enjoy the presentation.
Before we get into our speaker, Joe has some regulatory announcements that have been going on in the States. So everybody give Joe a round of applause, or I'll just give a round of applause for Joe alone. And take it away, Joe.
Yeah, it's usually about the response the compliance guy gets. I appreciate it, Brian. Thanks for thanks for humoring me. So for the newcomers, hi everybody, Joe Chicolo from BitAML. Our firm does regulatory compliance consulting in the crypto space, and so from time to time I have some updates to share from my interactions with regulators, lawyers, law enforcement, those in the private sector, et cetera. So today, real quick, I wanted to just give you an update on Assembly Bill 2150 here in California. So AB 2150. It is updated online as far as the last references that I'm aware of, if you wanted to do your own research and read it yourself. So as a quick refresher for those of you that have been here before, AB 2150 would effectively be the state licensing for California at a state level for money transmitters in crypto. So think of crypto exchanges, BTMs, other sort of traditional retail exchange type of business models. Anyway, 2150 basically got carved up and is now essentially talking about what it means to be a security and what the definition of securities is or are. There's really nothing new or interesting about that. I think it confirms many of the things that we may already know about what defines a security. I don't think that there's anything sort of earth-shattering about that. The big news is that it's moved away from actually talking about money transmitters in the crypto space. So seemingly fairly benign for those of you that provide exchange type of services or things like that. Certainly if you're in the security space, definitely want to read that and what it means for your business in California here if you're in the crypto space. In my conversations with Ali Medina, who's good friends with this group, as we all know, part of the Blockchain Advocacy Coalition, she does a lot of great work on behalf of the crypto space advocating. She also happens to be the mayor of Emeryville, California, which is pretty cool. Anyway, Ali's an awesome person. She was able to give us some updates. She and I had a candid conversation about 2150, and she's of the opinion that if best case, or not best case scenario, if everything goes perfectly and there's no wrinkles anywhere whatsoever in Sacramento, which we all know is probably not going to happen, she said the worst that could happen is there'd be some sort of license in 2021. More likely, we probably won't see too much action until the following year in 2022 on any measure of state licensing in California. So again, that's Ali's opinion, but it's very valued given her expertise and her ability to interact with some of the decision makers and policy makers in Sacramento. So good news there. For those of you worried about a state license, I know we've talked about that a lot, and Brian was trying to organize a march on the Capitol, I think, at one point. So we can call off the pitchforks and the torches, Brian. But no, seriously. So that's good news. It still gives some breathing room and some opportunity for those of you that maybe are either interested in the space or have a small business going right now, more of an opportunity to continue to benefit from this being a so-called no action state, in air quotes, for some or all of the business models in crypto in California. So we'll keep an eye on it, let you know if there's any other updates, but I think I've gone on and on too long. I've proven that I am a consultant. So I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
Now we have a very special speaker from a very prestigious publication. And Gibran, if you can introduce our speaker, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so it looks like a couple people have just started joining, and we'll keep having people, so a couple people will join more. Our next speaker is probably the most high-profile speaker that we've had recently. If anyone has heard, which everyone here has, of the infamous blockchain news website CoinDesk, our next speaker is the editor of this news publication. He is an entrepreneur, he's a consultant. I definitely noticed that he is a coder, and he still codes to this day. And he's been spending the last 15 years as an editor for other news publications as well, such as Gizmodo, CrunchGear, TechCrunch, and has a deep background in a variety of topics such as hardware startups, 3D printing, and of course our favorite blockchain and crypto. If you are in this world that we call crypto, blockchain, or decentralization, the way we get news in this lightning speed paced world is super, super important. And it's people like our speaker who help make it possible for us to be educated and follow along with what's going on. So if you can give it up for John Biggs, we'll have him speak.
Howdy, howdy. What do you want to know?
So I think it'd be really interesting if you were able to give us kind of a overview about how news in crypto has evolved. What has it been like seeing this happen, like seeing this influx of over the last few years, you've seen an influx of people join this industry, and how they get that information has changed. And so as an editor at CoinDesk, it'd be really interesting to get your perspective on seeing that change over the last few years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I think it's interesting for you to say infamous. I mean, it's not particularly infamous. It's basically just a news organization that writes about crypto. And the fact that it writes about crypto makes people angry, which is kind of confusing to me. So I used to be an editor over at TechCrunch, and I covered crypto over there, but I covered it selectively because there wasn't a lot of interesting news coming out of it. Now that I'm over at CoinDesk, I'm seeing loads and loads of interesting things, but the entire industry just doesn't have the understanding of media that it needs to have to become a little bit more mature. So when I first started out writing about crypto, it was basically just like people yelling at you in a I don't know, a Discord chat somewhere. So there was really no way to interact with the crypto world, and I've been covering it probably since 2011. I think I wrote one of the first posts on TechCrunch about Bitcoin mining, 2011. And so we stayed out of it for a couple years before that. Obviously, we stayed out of it 2008 to about 2010. Then it started getting interesting. But to get information on it, you would go into an IRC or something like that. And you'd ask a question, and then somebody would yell at you. Then you'd be like, "All right, this is dumb." At this point, I think there's almost a system of haves and have-nots. There are certain projects that have loads and loads of cash, and they're hiring PR people, not very good PR people, but PR people. And then there's other projects that are just basically just limping along and being intensely frustrated by the media. So you have the worst of both possible worlds. You have people who are deeply frustrated because they can't get the story out there, because crypto stories are difficult to tell, because crypto stories are very complex, crypto stories are very technical, and the average journalist has a liberal arts education versus a computer science education. So to try to convince them or to try to explain something to them is fairly difficult. The way things have changed, I guess, is that the big guys have people to speak for them in ways that they're unable to speak for themselves. The little guys are still kind of stuck, frustrated. So I can understand why there might be some sense of the crypto news is fixed, or crypto news is only looking out for one or two special things. But in fact, that's the stuff that we hear about. And for us to get any deeper into the technology requires either time or expertise that's just unavailable to any of us. When we ask for help, it turns into a yelling match in some Slack channels. So it's kind of frustrating for us as well. But I just wanted to understand what you guys are up against.
Yeah, I mean, what do you mean by what we're up against?
I mean, what are your specific questions? What do you guys need to know about crypto media, or how to get your story told, etc.?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the big questions is regarding there's all these different sources of news and information now, and I think in a time like now more than ever, we're seeing how influential and important these sources, like what kind of power these sources have. Um, what have you seen, like a struggle with finding truth and relaying that truth to people? Like what has that been like? I know that there are big kind of more of your like conventional traditional finance news agencies that are publishing information about crypto and Bitcoin that might not be as accurate as maybe they should be. Some of them are more opinion pieces. um, when it comes to relaying truth and information for people interested in crypto, what has that been like navigating that? How do you distill that sort of information versus like the big guys, like, whatever the existing news sources that exist?
Well, remember, like, so if you're talking about Forbes or whatever, Forbes is absolute garbage. Anything that you read in Forbes is just junk. That's basically their Forbes contributor network. They're trying to phase that out, but any moron can get up there and write whatever post they want, especially an opinion post. And a lot of people have used that to their advantage. They've posted stuff on Forbes and they've used that as sort of like their hype to bump their hype cycle, right? Um, and it's frustrating, obviously, because people take it seriously. But I mean, the fact that people still take it seriously is kind of a testament to Forbes brand name, etc. New York Times doesn't have anybody covering crypto. Nate Popper quit. He doesn't care about it anymore. Wall Street Journal, you couldn't find two people who actually understand what crypto is in there. Um, and I know the people who would. What's his name? Vigna is still there. Vigna. Paul Vigna is still hanging out. Michael Casey came from Wall Street Journal. He works for us now. Um, those organizations just don't take it seriously. And to get upset about that is like, I don't know, getting upset that the Wall Street Journal isn't covering National Writers Month properly because they never written a novel in a month, or they don't understand sci-fi because they've never read Terry Pratchett. It's something that it's a very specific fascination that is almost religious to some people, and anything short of absolute excellence is an affront to the original idea. And then in terms of truth, I mean, everything you read on CoinDesk is true. It's been vetted, it's been checked, it's been proofread. And if you don't like what's there, that's not specifically our problem. There are sites out there that are kind of garbage, but the vast majority of these sites are trying to put out information that's valuable. CCN, for example, kind of went off the rails. I don't know what's going on over there. The block is doing an acceptable job. Uh, they're a bunch of zealots over there as well. So I mean, they want what you want. They want to be taken. They want to be taken seriously. And in a world where the average person barely understands their credit score, let alone that Bitcoin halving, that's really, really difficult to pull off.
Yeah. Um, are there systems in place that you've designed or that you've like learned from your experience in the past, that you use to kind of like as an editor, how do you remove what needs to be cut out and keep what needs to be kept? Like what is the methodology there? How do you decide what needs to be given to the people?
Well, I mean, the goal of most of the stories. I mean, look, so there are multiple types of stories that you can get. For example, I like to do stories about people who got scammed and how we can try to help people. That's what I always like to do. And that's because it's an interesting story. It's there's a criminal who did something goofy, screwed somebody, and I would love to help that person get their cash back and also explain what happened so nobody else gets caught. And I've done that a couple times already. But then you have a situation where it's just like a press release, for example. And our mission there is to get some information about the product. But if it's in front of us and there's 4 other products very similar to it, but they're all out of, I don't know, Sacramento and Belarus and, I don't know, Estonia, and they haven't reached out to us about it, and they get frustrated that we've already written about a topic of their that they're familiar with, that can't be our responsibility on that, to that extent. Today's post is tomorrow's fish wrapper, so this is a very fast moving operation. Perhaps tomorrow we're going to write about your Sacramento startup versus a New York startup. Most of the time it doesn't happen because nobody reaches out to us. And then finally, there's more investigative pieces where we're actually doing a little bit of digging. And it's on a very specific and broader and more valuable topic than just somebody's new startup. So we've been writing a lot about Bitcoin's effects in the Middle East or in Latin America. And that's a very human story, and that's an interesting story for everybody. So we're going to do a lot more research there. But as it stands right now, we're doing 26 posts a day. Over at TechCrunch, we used to do 60 posts a day. So these are pieces of information that are passed on, vetted to as deeply as they can be within, I don't know, a few hour span. And the vast majority of time, 99.99% of the time, they're correct. That if you don't like them, that's a whole different other story. But there's no fake news, quote unquote, here. That's one of the things that I think is that people don't understand.
So John, I have a question for you. A couple years ago, we were trying to when the bit license was being talked about being done in California. We kind of tried to organize, and we did a rally. We were putting that together, and one of our first things was to kind of reach out to all the cryptocurrency blogs out there. And when we did it, a lot of times we would just get an email back like, oh, okay, you're doing an ICO. If you want us to write about it, that'll be $1,000 paid in Bitcoin. And I'm still getting emails to this day from blogs because we reached out to a journalist or a blog about a story, and then that kind of happened. So I guess my question is how would a community group like us ever get covered for anything we do when it seems like your guys' walls are very high for what you cover?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, so either you have the absolute garbage sites that charge you. You never pay for coverage, no matter what anybody tells you, no matter what. It's absolute, it's complete junk. The the answer is you have to do something that's very specifically newsworthy for that moment, or something that's very human. So if you're going to say that, yeah, we're going to do I think a couple years ago, maybe you could have done a protest sort of situation and taken some pictures and did some sort of community outreach. That would have worked. Or you could offer yourself up as an expert on the bit license in California, that sort of thing. There's any number of ways you could target that. If anybody's hassling you about paying them for a post, then you just post their name on you just send the email to Twitter and post it on Twitter. Say straight up, I don't care about LA token. I don't understand who's this guy's asking about. Is there somebody in chat? The post all those bad actors on Twitter, get rid of them. Tell everybody else about them. There's no value in just because those guys are asking for $1,000 or whatever, doesn't mean you have to pay it. You definitely shouldn't pay it. You should never pay for coverage. And you should avoid those people at all costs. And you should tell other people to avoid them. That's the only answer. The bad actors come from places where, yeah, it's okay to cover, where it's okay to pay journalists. And that's Russia, that's China, that's other parts of Europe. It's a really awful thing, and it should be stopped, and it is being stopped slowly but surely. But those bad actors are trying to recreate their business practices here in the U.S., and it shouldn't be allowed. Nobody can pay for a post on TechCrunch or a post on CoinDesk.
There is a question in here that refers back to the topic about traditional media. Question is, what can we do to help close the knowledge gap with traditional media?
If I'm being honest, I think there's very little you can do. I think the only thing you can do is to build cool stuff and just keep building. The biggest problem is that whole indistinguishable magic kind of thing just isn't there yet. Right now, that crypto is indistinguishable from like heavy lumbering machinery. Nobody quite understands what it can do. It looks a little bit dangerous, and it looks looks like if you touch it, you can lose a finger or you can lose a lot of money. So nobody's quite exactly sure what to do with it. Just wait. I mean, think about Linux, for example. And I always go back to the example of Linux. In 98, 99, 2000, if you were running Linux, you were like super hacker extraordinaire. Nobody understood what you're talking about, and nor did anybody really care. I mean, Linux Journal, I used to write for Linux Journal, and I think they had a circulation of like my mom and two other people. So, and it was a great magazine. It was a great website. And now I have a Linux device in almost every room. But nobody needs to understand that it's a Linux device. It's basically the backbone of an entire infrastructure, an entire ecosystem that just runs itself without having me understand how to recompile my own kernel. Sure, it's fun to recompile my own kernel, but nobody else wants to do it outside of a certain group of people. So you have to treat it that way. You have to enter into a understanding with the world that, yeah, my project isn't going to be understood. My project isn't going to be appreciated. And until it's so far behind the scenes that it becomes impossible to ignore.
I have a couple questions in here. Joe says, here, lovely answer.
Yeah.
So someone was asking, I'm going to merge two of their questions together. I mean, granted, COVID is happening, and granted, the last couple of years haven't been as hyped in traditional media as previously. Have you seen growth in this space, in the crypto space, from your perspective? And what kind of growth have you seen? Could you compare it to some other surge in tech in the past?
So one of the biggest problems with, I'm getting an echo for some reason. One of the biggest problems with covering, so I used to cover startups, and startups were sort of a general catch-all term for small businesses with global ambition. Oh Christ. A small business with global ambition. The benefit of covering startups is there was something cool and something new, and it could be funded by traditional means, VC, basically somebody writing you a check, et cetera, et cetera. Now there's all sorts of other opportunities associated with equity crowdfunding, security tokens, that sort of thing. And that's one of the things that I'm really fascinated by, because as a startup founder myself, I understood it's really difficult to pull together the cash necessary to build an app, to build a website, to build almost anything, let alone build a business. So I would love to see these things work, but we screwed up, right? So we started this whole idea of ICOs, STOs, all this other good stuff, and we screwed it up because some dude thought that they needed $40 million to buy, I don't know, 50 Aeron chairs out in Minsk. And now it's ruined for everybody. So I would love to see that turn around. Once that starts turning around, once that starts actually allowing a startup in Sacramento to bootstrap itself with a couple $100,000 using security tokens, I think that's really going to be a sea change, because obviously the retail investor can look at that and say, oh, this is similar to buying Apple stock. It's a lot more risky. It's a lot cheaper. And the returns are a little bit more interesting because it's a brand new technology. It's a frontier technology that the average VC isn't going to touch because they know it's not a business yet. So once that starts flipping, I think it's going to be a lot more interesting. As it stands right now, the guys who made a bunch of cash in the ICO days are doing okay. The exchanges are doing fine, but I would argue that the vast majority of the news that comes out of crypto right now is basically just the same stuff over and over again. Um, and that's for me sitting here staring at it all day long, as I have been. There are a couple interesting things. There's a lot more. There's a lot more regulation. There's a lot more management of fraud, which I'm glad to see, and that's actually going to improve trust for a lot of people as well.
So, John, my question is, have you gotten jaded because of journalism, or specifically crypto journalism that jaded you?
Let's say crypto journalism. It's kind of, so the way I always explain it, and I'm not jaded per se. I sound jaded because it's 10 o'clock here, dude. And I've been up since 6. We have disruptor, or no, what the freak, consensus right now, which is the event. We're having our full day, full week event kind of thing, and I've been cutting video all day. But yeah, I'm jaded deeply. The crypto has been a little bit of what I saw back in 2010, where it's just grumpy people yelling that their technology is better. But it's actually gotten a lot. It's the people are a lot more interesting now. There's a lot more energy in the space, and I think there was a big shakeout of kind of like the scammers and the shysters. So maybe that's where I'm coming from right now, trying to figure out a footing in a world where there aren't so many people that you can't trust. But the people that you can trust aren't doing very interesting things yet, primarily because the technology and the regulation just don't match.
Is there a like crypto's global, right? And so is there a particular type of like a niche in crypto that you've seen explode in a particular part of the country, or in a particular part of the world, that has surprised you? Or is what I've struggled with is that there's a lot of action happening in other parts of the world, like Korea, and it's really hard to get information from there about like what's happening and how it's working. And so sometimes I feel like I'm missing out on whether something's blowing up somewhere else, and the American market just doesn't catch on.
Well, the American market isn't a catch on because you have the SEC down everybody's back, and you have Gaming Commission, you have all this other stuff, and let's argue for a minute that that sort of rule of law, that sort of regulation, is valuable in protecting the ignorant investor, fine, or the ignorant gambler, fine, or the poor person, on the poor little couple on Social Security, so they don't invest in, I don't know, pork bellies or something like that. Perfect. The idea that a lot of those regulations are pulled away is enticing. It's exciting, and in a lot of countries, it's kind of there. But I would also argue that those are sort of hype cycle. Like that's what happens is you're in a situation where like South Korea, or I don't know, Malta, or Estonia does something interesting, changes the regulation in some way, and you get a couple startups that are kind of doing things, and it looks like it's a little bit bigger than it used to be, because you're increasing the penetration by 100% when you have 2 more startups, right? So I would, and I actually ran a crypto remittances startup in 2014, and now everybody's doing exactly what we were doing in 2014, trying to do in 2014, now doing it in 2020 without any problem. And it's just basically and all the lawyers back in 2014 said we're going to go straight to jail, and now you have like everybody else trying to pull it off, and they pull it off. So work within the confines of where you are. If you want to go to a different place, then just get on a plane and go when we're allowed to go on planes. Otherwise, be here now, I guess, is the answer. Because what's the benefit of worrying about what Malta is doing when you have when you have the largest market in the world right here in the U.S. And one of the savviest markets in the world, and one of the most accessible, actually, and the most addressable, as long as you have a little bit of cash and put a little bit of effort into it in terms of marketing.
I like that. Yeah. There's a question here in the chat saying exchanges are reporting high volumes. What are folks saying about this? Is it the halving, or are we capturing some of the masses in quarantine and or folks disenchanted with Fed policy?
No, nobody's disenchanted with Fed policy. Nobody cares about Fed policy. Yeah, the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation. So they go to work, they come home, and they enjoy some takeout. That's basically it. That has the deeper implications of this whole technology has very little to do with the average person. I mean them in the most Christian, loving sense. The reason why it's going up is because of the halving. People have heard about the halving. People who didn't buy crypto this time want to take part in the halving. You're also seeing a lot of whale activity right now. And that's another frustrating thing that I see is I see a lot of we do a daily podcast about the market, and I follow the market as much as I can. And the market is still manipulable by guys with a couple $100 million in Bitcoin. And you also have a situation, and this is interesting. I was talking with a buddy of mine who's basically like a white hat hacker. He does security for folks, and he has friends who, I guess, themselves are basically hackers, and they've basically stolen a couple $100 million in crypto, but they can't get it out, so they can't turn it into fiat. So they basically just play with it. They just use it as sort of a prod to see what happens to the market when they dump X amount into this exchange, into X amount into this exchange. They can't activate that cash, so they're just messing with it. So we're in a situation where the whales are playing right now. I think we'll know when the average Joe is interested in crypto when you start hearing that people that you never thought would be into crypto start asking you about it. And that happened back in 2018, I guess. That's when, for example, Consensus was huge. There were 10,000 people in a hotel that was supposed to hold like 5,000. It was crazy. And why were they there? They had heard about that Bitcoin went to 20,000 and they wanted a piece of that action. And when Bitcoin went back down to 4,000, 8,000, they didn't want a piece of that action anymore. So I guess that's the answer. It's a lot of whales, and it's a lot of people who got out or were holding for a while and now want to play a little bit.
Somebody asks, do you see Bitcoin as a threat to the fiat world of currency? And does CoinDesk have any views on your position as an advocate in this potential conflict between Bitcoin and fiat?
No, I mean, I would argue that us being an advocate for it is like being an advocate for credit cards back before credit cards existed. Credit cards were a unique way of managing money that kind of worked around fiat for all intents and purposes. This is a currency in itself, but there's no need to storm the ramparts when the technology and the system is inevitable. And if it's not inevitable, then we all did something wrong. So we have to figure that out. One thing I always say is that writing about crypto right now is like writing about it's either about writing about communism in 1989 and saying communism is great and nothing can change it and it's going to be the best thing ever, or it's like writing about how great the monarchy is during the French Revolution and something better is going to replace monarchy, which was democracy. So I'm trying to figure out what we're doing right now. Are we crowing about communism, or are we crowing about the benefits of the French Revolution? I believe it's the French Revolution, and I don't think we're going back. I don't think we're going to lose. Um, but I mean, the wheel's still in spin, right? So we have to figure out what that means. But in terms of being a news organization that covers crypto, we're a news organization that covers crypto. There's nothing philosophically deep about that.
Is there a lot of people have a different take on the phrase mass adoption? One, whether that's even important, and two, what that means. Could you kind of explain what your sentiment or what your perspective is on that phrase?
So we're doing actually a TV program, where it's basically me traveling around being jaded and bored, talking to people who are into crypto and asking them to try to get me excited about it. And it's worked so far. And the way I see it is that mass adoption is a methodology in which the average person, or the average person with some intelligence, is going to use these tools and technologies to improve their lives and the lives of people around them. That's the only answer for mass adoption. There's never going to be a situation where you go down the street and swipe your Bitcoin card or whatever, because it's all going to be subsumed by Visa, MasterCard, and whatever comes after that. The big brands are always going to win in this case, but the piping can be there, and the piping is going to slowly erode the regulations and the rent seeking and the sense of the incumbent's power and purpose over the generations. So just because we're using Visa doesn't mean that the pipes aren't crypto. And just because there exists something like a Western Union doesn't mean you can't use crypto to transmit. So in terms of mass adoption, I want to see it as another alternative way to get things done. Maybe somebody's going to offer something slightly better. Maybe there's a value add in using Western Union. I doubt there ever will be, but maybe they're going to convince people of that. And then the smart people are just going to use the system. It's like it's very similar to the internet. What's the internet? The internet is a network, communication network that routes around damage, whereas crypto is a monetary network that routes around damage. So once people realize they can use that to their advantage for good or ill, they're going to try.
What are some of the best and worst pitches you've ever gotten?
I mean, people used to like corner me in bathrooms. So those were always bad pitches because I'm trying to take a leak. Some of the best pitches are just human pitches. One of my favorite stories that I ever wrote was about a little piece of plastic that goes on a WD-40 can, and attaches to the top and attaches to the straw. And this was before they actually had this thing on the actual WD-40 cans. And this company in Pennsylvania was making these things, and they were selling it for like, I don't know, $2 or something like that. And I wrote about them. I think this was on Gizmodo. This was probably 2004 or something like that, before anybody was thinking about gadget blogs. And they turned their company around. They fixed the world found out about this little dongle that attaches the straw to your WD-40 can, and it helped them immensely. And that's essentially the goal of a journalist, to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. It's hard. It's actually really hard to afflict the comfortable these days, because they're really, really, really comfortable. So at least we can try to comfort the afflicted.
Just a brief clarification. Would you say the path of Linux then is really the path of the crypto? Like, it'll be the piping, but you'll have Microsoft as, you know.
It doesn't have to be Microsoft. It could be any one of you guys. Yeah. But yeah, the piping hides in the background and is vitally important. But it's the front facing stuff that nobody has gotten right yet. And I think that's because the people who are using the back end are also building the front end, and that has to change.
There's a fun question here saying, who are the biggest scammers in crypto? Do you want to point some fingers?
Not specifically. I mean, there's plenty of scammers in crypto. One of my favorite things was there's this whole like it's like those birds on the hippopotamus's back, whatever they're called, that just kind of eat the bugs and stuff. So like I was in a who was I talking to? Might have been Kraken or it was one of the exchanges. I was doing a story on it, and I was trying to find the PR person for that exchange. And all of a sudden, I get like 40 people pop up in my Telegram saying, "Oh yeah, I'm the PR person for the exchange, PR person for the exchange." And I had one guy who wanted to charge me to write about the exchange because I needed a special license to write about it. But then it got into the point where he wanted me to be on the exchange, and it was this whole different. He made this whole thing up just on the fly, just to screw me. And I saw through it immediately. But to talk about the biggest scammers, I mean, every great fortune is built on a great crime. So let's go up and down the list of the guys who have the cash. But I mean, what's worse are the folks who are giving this industry a bad name by being really, really bad at robbing people, by being really, really bad at getting cash from people in order to do business, right? So you have these guys who are trying to steal $10,000 from a startup to get a fake post on CoinDesk, whereas you also have folks who are, I don't know, they're offering dubiously good products in order to maintain revenue. Maybe we like them, maybe we don't, but at least they're trying, at least they're building something. So I can't really fault anybody immediately. The only people I can fault are those little pecky birds that hang around the big guys and try to grab scraps.
There was a comment here referencing the previous question. They said in the third world, Visa and Western Union are not an option. That's where the revolution will begin.
I mean, we went down to Argentina. We spoke to a lot of Venezuelans. And especially down there, we didn't go anywhere full bore third world per se. Unfortunately, I would love to go to Nigeria. I would love to go to places where this technology is absolutely necessary. But again, it's a piping issue. It's somebody's going to eventually connect those pipes out to a village somewhere and get somebody universal income via that system, and it's going to reduce the cost and improve the speed immensely. But is anybody in that village going to say thank you, Satoshi Nakamoto, for giving us this technology? Absolutely not. It's never going to happen, and nobody really cares. Get stuff done, get it working, and worry about the praise when, I don't know, a guy like me writes the story of Bitcoin in 20 years, and you become the godfather of, I don't know, sending money to small villages in Venezuela. And yeah, and Western Union does work in the third world. It sucks. It's the worst. And Visa does work in the third world. They're working harder to get their name in there and get their products in there than anybody else in the crypto space, 100%. And they know that that's they because they're out of market share here in the developed world. So yeah, you can fly to Venezuela and swipe a credit card. You can send Western Union down there, and Western Union is more than happy to screw people down there.
There's another question in here saying that based off of your perspective, where you've seen previous failures, what are some of the game-changing business opportunities or unsolved problems in the space that like you're most excited about?
Most excited about is a difficult proposition. What's interested in would be something that's would be the front end. I want to see a better front end. There used to be an old commercial, EF Hutton, whatever EF Hutton says. I forget what the commercial is. You look it up. It's a goofy thing. So like my broker EF Hutton said, and the whole boat or the whole like marina or the golf course stops and listens because EF Hutton was the guy to listen to. John McAfee, he tried to pull that off, but he's nuts. And there are a couple of people who are like sort of like these gurus of the crypto world, but they're unknown outside of the crypto world. Somebody like what they did with EF Hutton marketing is they created a persona around trading, around financial instruments, and that persona became sort of the de facto vision of what people had for stocks and bonds, etc. In that period, and that was the 80s, 70s, 80s, I guess. So that same sort of vision needs to happen here, where I know who I can trust. That's a very humanized face for this crypto, for the potential scams of crypto, and it's something that I could just press a button and have work. What did E-Trade do, for example? It turned retail investing into a game for a lot of people. And that's kind of important because once it's a game, everybody can take part without losing too much or without driving themselves crazy. Obviously, you have some outliers there, but the democratization of that sort of access is vitally important.
There's a question here. I don't know if you can answer this. I guess. Oh yeah, this one actually is okay. I thought it said which one is your favorite crypto or token, but it says out of all the different cryptocurrencies, where are you seeing the most development? And if you'd like to speak on it, where are you seeing and what do you like the most?
I mean, there's so much. I've talked to Vitalik a couple times about ETH 2.0. That sounds interesting. I'm kind of interested in the privacy tokens, Zcash and a couple other ones. Cardano is interesting mostly because of Charles Hoskinson. He's kind of like the Indiana Jones of the space. He's like flying around the world, like I don't know, Nepal and setting up incubators and things. He kind of has the right idea. He built the technology and he's trying to spread the word. He's trying to evangelize it in a very specific way that's specific to his platform and his technology. So yeah, I think those are a few that I'm interested in. I think Bitcoin has kind of become the standard because it's what everybody knows. But in terms of new stuff that's coming out, it's a little hard to say.
There's a question specifically about the technologies of cross-chain atomic swaps and, in general, distributed exchanges. Do you have a take on those two?
I haven't followed a lot of that. We did a little bit of coverage there when we were at ETH Denver, but that was somebody else was managing all that stuff. I try to stay out of a lot of the nitty gritty right now, mostly because I'm doing a lot of media. So you can't really visualize cross-chain atomic swaps with a cartoon, unfortunately.
I did see you. There's a few popular crypto books out there. One being Bitcoin Billionaires, and I know you have you had one book that was unrelated to technology, but I'm wondering if you are like maybe working on or interested in compiling your experiences and writing a book. Oh yeah, someone's holding up Bitcoin Billionaires.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm actually working on well, we just finished a book. Actually, it's coming out in September. Yeah, I'll put a link in. It's called Get Funded, and it's basically all my experience from the TechCrunch VC days, and then and I'm trying to add in a little bit about crypto funding and things. And a lot of it's about storytelling. And that's kind of what I harp on all the time is storytelling. A lot of people aren't telling the right stories, or they're not telling stories at all. And that's kind of because the people who make this stuff don't think in terms of stories. They think very linearly, and they think in terms of cause and effect, whereas a story is where a story has multiple arcs and may not. And one of the benefits of storytelling is that you can surprise and delight. Not a lot of that going on in crypto, at least right now. And I think it's going to get there, definitely.
Are you by chance mentoring people who would want to become journalists in this space? What can people who are aspiring to be telling stories in this industry do to improve their skills and rise to the occasion?
What can they do to improve their skills? I mean, they have to write. One of the best ways to do it is to create your own little Substack newsletter. It's probably really easy to do. That's always fun. You can do your own blog, or you can just offer to cover news for a news organization that you like. It's difficult. It's crazy hard. And a lot of people just ignore that kind of email. I tried not to, but vast majority of the time that stuff gets buried, unfortunately. Just get noticed and become a part of the ecosystem on the media angle. For example, you guys running this thing, it's fairly important. And if you start a little blog, or you start a Substack, you start a podcast or something like that, and just get somebody else's attention, then you can break into it. Getting into crypto journalism right now. So tech journalism used to be a niche thing. I have a bachelor's in information systems from Carnegie Mellon, and I got a master's in journalism from NYU, and this was in 2001. And in 2001, being a tech journalist was like being a unicorn. There was we didn't really exist. Nobody was sure how to pet us, and we were dangerous. So the tech section in the New York Times was one page on the back of the sports section, and on every Thursday or something like that. So I was writing for that for a long time. Then blogs came along, and we kind of changed the way people thought about news. Gizmodo came along, and things changed slowly but surely. But most of that was just me always writing, always putting stuff together. I ran a watch blog. I still run a watch blog because I was into watches. So I started covering watches. And it gets frustrating. You don't get the access that you want, but find your angles. I wrote a book about blogging as well. I can send you guys a copy if you just email me, john@biggs.cc. I'll send you a PDF or whatever.
Is it okay if I add your email down here in the chat?
Yeah, that's fine.
john@biggs.cc.
Yep.
There we go. There is, someone asked, how can we get in touch with you? Is that email the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, that's the easiest. Just put something like Sacramento in the subject line or whatever.
Okay. I know it's late on your side, so we'll just take a few more questions if that's okay with you.
Mm-hmm.
There is a topic we were talking about earlier. We've talked about it for a while, and it's the topic of Bitcoin maximalism. It seems like it's pretty contentious, and there's a lot of people who see it in different ways. Some people think it's just, being mainly enthused about Bitcoin. Some people see it as a toxic trait. How do you see Bitcoin maximalism, and what does it mean to you?
I mean, who gives a shit? It's just work together on the projects that you're trying to build. Who cares about Bitcoin maximalists? Who cares about crypto Twitter? Who cares about what people think about this technology or this or another technology? It really doesn't matter. It's like arguing whether Django is better than Laravel. I mean, if you're into PHP, then code in Laravel. If you're into Python, then code in Django. but call it a day. Just figure something out and do it. All this anger is really goofy, honestly. And just because you're invested, or just because you have your bags, or just because you thought this thing was great. The reason why I brought up, the reason why I did bring up communism that one time is that my dad used to tell me this story about this guy he knew, who was a communist scholar at, I think it was like OSU or something like that. And he defined his entire life's work on one philosophy, and he thought it was going to be the best philosophy ever. And when stuff went sideways over there, he basically just became despondent. His entire personality was based on this one trait, and that's completely ridiculous. Again, that could be part of the fascination that a lot of people have with these crypto things, is that because they're so monomaniacal and focused on one thing, that they can't allow any other thoughts into their heads. But I don't think that's true. I think that's kind of ridiculous. And anybody who says they're maximalist or pro Ethereum or whatever, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Who cares? Just solve big problems and get stuff done. And then we can all argue about that stuff. I don't know, when we're swimming in our big pools of money.
Do you still foresee the world of like cryptocurrencies being somewhat like the world of startups? Many will die and a few will rise above.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And a lot of projects are going to go away. That's why it's so hard to really dedicate yourself to any one project, because somebody on Medium is going to say, we just stole all your money, we're gone now. And one of the things that I see a lot is what I saw a lot in the gadgets world. It doesn't happen so much anymore, because I guess it's a little bit more mature. And they say religions kind of mellow out over time as well. But I knew it was going to be a real scam when there were thousands of people just supporting something 100%. Palm, for example, there was a big Palm contingent when those phones first started coming out. And if you said anything against Palm, you were like the evil one. So the first phones came out, they were kind of janky, they were all right, they were fun, but you still had these people who are dedicated. They believed that Palm was going to turn around. They were going to beat iPhone. They're going to beat Android. It was going to be the best phone in the world. And the more vociferous and angrier they are, the more likely their primary view of the world is wrong. And you can kind of extrapolate that out to almost anything in the world. I don't want to get too political, but that's basically the situation. The mark of the mature man is that he lives humbly for a cause, and the mark of an immature man is that he dies nobly for one. And I think that's applicable here, and it's applicable in many cases.
Somewhat related here, there's a question that brings up that the luster of Bitcoin was originally privacy and decentralization. Do you think this is gone with mining pools? And do you think the government will, or a government will in the end be in control of crypto?
I don't think it can. I mean, you can set up regulations around various aspects of this industry. But like I said, this is money that routes around damage. And regulation implicitly is damage. You're going to get stuff done, and you're going to be able to move. You're going to be able to move your $10,000 here to Sweden all day long, back and forth. Somebody's going to notice, and they're going to want their cut. But if you're smart about it, they don't have to get that cut. And I'm not saying break the law. I'm just saying it routes around damage, and laws are damage in this specific case. And I think that luster is still there. So what governments are going to have to figure out is how to get their pound of flesh in a new world. Whereas they used to get their pound of flesh by regulating things out of existence. Then you had high walls to recreating, I don't know, remittances, for example, is an awful world, because a lot of shysters get remittance licenses, or they piggyback on other government, they piggyback on other banks, and it's all just a scam. Like Western Union, for example, is the worst scam in the world, but it's protected and it's incumbent, so it's not going anywhere until it becomes really, really uncomfortable for them to exist. And it's going to become uncomfortable for them to exist when things are whizzing around them as opposed to through them, and they'll eventually figure it out. Again, the luster of Bitcoin and all the luster is still there. It's not hidden. It hasn't gone anywhere. And if you say that a little bit of regulation or a little bit of government notice is going to change your view on something, that's ridiculous. I mean, I think that's a fallacy. So you're kind of stuck working within the confines of a system that was built for the previous century, and building tools that for the next century that are going to, for all intents and purposes, ignore those previous rules. And somebody smart in government is going to have to figure that out, and they're going to have to create rules around it. I mean, yeah, it sucks to have a bit license in New York, but it's not impossible to get a bit license in New York. And once you do have a bit license, it's kind of like being on the inside joke with all these other Wall Street folks who basically just throw money at a problem and it gets finished. Obviously, a lot of people here don't have the cash to throw around for a bit license, so it kind of sucks. But I don't know, build a business that makes that cash, pay for the bit license, and make even more cash.
A related question to that is something you did talk about earlier, is when it comes to the US particularly, and possibly even California or New York or one of these bigger states with a larger tech presence, do you think regulation is going to ultimately inhibit the growth and spread of this technology here? Are we sabotaging ourselves?
No, I don't think we're sabotaging ourselves. I think regulation is fine. Regulation is necessary, and in a lot of cases, the vast majority of the situations that I hear, the regulators actually want to hear from the companies. And you have a lot of these safe harbor sort of situations because the regulators have no idea what to do. And you have one or two folks in the organization, the whatever Crypto Dad and those guys, who kind of understand what's going on, and they support it. And then eventually they leave and they go start their own crypto startups. But just reach out to the regulators. I know it sucks, and it's an extra step, and you just want to code, but the answer is that this is part of building the business. If you just want to build code, then build code by all means. Just do a bunch of GitHub commits and call it a day. If you want to build a business, or if you want to change the world, you actually have to work within the confines of what you have and blossom out of those confines when the time comes.
The last question, if you have any other questions left, please do put them in the chat. Otherwise, the last question I have here is, do you think ultimately we're looking at a replacement for fiat entirely? Is the future of the world, like when do you think a country will use Bitcoin as their currency? Is that in our future?
I don't think so. I think it'll ever be used as a currency, a country currency, I guess you could say. The technology will be stolen and used by plenty of places, by plenty of currencies, and maybe you could call it a Bitcoin if you really wanted to be semantic about it. If you wanted to argue semantics, but I think the benefit of the original Bitcoin spec is that it could be used and taken by anybody to build anything, and that's deeply important. It's just like Linux. I mean, the dollar is digital anyway. The dollar isn't a physical object anymore. We carry dollars, but only the peons carry dollars. The rest of the world is moving millions of dollars in nanoseconds or you're swiping a credit card in, I don't know, Nigeria, and it's showing up on your phone instantly. So we can't say that we're using physical currencies anymore. What we are using is we're using a set of technologies that were built over, let's say, 100 years, maybe since the last Great Depression in the 30s, that were designed to streamline and prevent a lot of fraud for banks that wanted to have a global presence. So we're using that technology that took them billions of dollars and countless man hours to build. So you think they're going to give that up? Absolutely not. They're not going to give that up anytime soon. By saying what we've done is we've basically replaced all that technology, that 200 years, that 100 years of technology with, I don't know, a couple hundred lines of code and some wallets, and they have no idea what to do with that. They have no idea how to understand that. They will eventually, because guys like you are going to quit the crypto racket and go join them and sit in their IT departments and say, yeah, if we take this code and just plug it in here, we don't have to pay Swift fees anymore. And then some dude who's much older is going to sit and say, oh, that sounds great, let's do it. He doesn't care if it's crypto, he doesn't care if it's Dogecoin, he doesn't care if it's whatever, just as long as it works. And that's where you win. You win by slowly ensconcing yourself into the status quo.
Someone asked, where do you think we'll see the biggest impact of blockchain technology?
I wish I could say right now. I feel like it might be identity. I also feel like it's tracing. I asked some of the IBM blockchain guys why they just didn't use, I don't know, a MySQL database, which is kind of a smart ass question, but nobody really answered it properly. But one guy did. He basically said, look, this technology is open source. It's not expensive. It's not expected to implement, and anybody can run it on their junk phones. So what you do need, you need a ledger. You need to have a complete understanding of where things are going, where things are coming from. And if I have a smartphone that's subpar, I can still run some sort of blockchain system on it versus running an entire MySQL instance and a bunch of other stuff that I would need to get stuff done. I mean, eventually you need a server for that. And there's all kinds of caveats there. But the mass majority of time, you just want a phone that you wave at a object that can take a picture of something's, I don't know, molecular structure somehow and transmit that to a place. And that system ensures that the information that you sent it is unadulterated as it passed over the network, as it came from you, etc. And the cheapest and best way to do that is a blockchain. Does that mean that, I don't know, the IBM blockchain is better than anybody else's blockchain? Absolutely not. It doesn't mean that it makes any sense to use these tools just yet. Probably not. But it's nice that somebody's trying.
I like that. I think that was our last question. I know you've, I don't know what your sleep habits are like, but I know you've been up for quite a while. We really appreciate you being here, John. Thank you so much for taking your time out. I'll unmute everybody and we can give you a little round of applause.
Super.
Your virtual round of applause.
Yeah. No, look, if you guys need anything, just email me. I'm around. It's not I'm not as cranky as I seem. I'm just
Promise.
today, yeah.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, especially because of how late it is over there.
Thank you very much, John.
Yeah,
right,
John's email is in the chat, and is it okay if we follow you on Twitter or something like that?
Yeah, it's just at John Biggs.
Cool. We'll do that, and For anyone who is interested in reaching out to John, you can use that email or follow his Twitter there. If you're interested in joining our Discord to continue the conversation when our meetups are not happening like this, I'll add a link into the chat here. And other than that,
other than that, can we do a tease for the next meeting, and then if anybody, will do an open floor. But we'll let John go to bed here.
All right. I'll talk to you guys later.
Night. Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
John.
have fun. See ya.